All right. Good morning to all. Welcome. There we go. Welcome to Monday. How was the weekend?
It was
It was good?
yeah.
Do anything fun?
We got vaccine for the first day.
Oh, okay. I don't know if that's fun, but it's good.
Yeah.
How'd you feel afterwards?
It was okay. I was okay.
You okay? Sore arm?
No.
No? Oh, good. Mine was really sore for both times. It was really
The
sore.
first dose
Both.
or both?
Second one was more sore than the first.
Yeah, second one. I think
Yeah. But I got two different ones too, so maybe that made a difference. I don't know. But that's good. That's good news. Okay, so some people got vaccinated. That's fun. What else? Any other fun stuff this weekend? No? No?
I bought a coffee and then I dropped down.
You bought a coffee and you dropped it?
Yeah.
Well, that's not fun.
Yeah.
That's very sad and disappointing.
It is
The only thing worse, I think, is when you get an ice cream cone and then the ice cream falls out, and then you're like, oh, that's the worst. But the coffee's bad too. Yeah. Okay. Anything exciting to report? Don't remember? Nothing? Today at 1:45 we have a hold and secure drill. Do you know what that is? Yeah? What is it?
It's when there's a danger in your school, and they will inform you that there's danger in your school, then you just need to study and stay in the school and cannot go outside.
Exactly. So a hold and secure, we did the lockdown drill. Wasn't last week, it was like the week before, wasn't it? Yeah, so the lockdown drill is kind of a little more serious. If somebody dangerous was in the school, we'd want to protect ourselves. For a hold and secure, it's just kind of to, if something might be happening outside somewhere, basically we're just making sure the school is secure. We're going to lock all the outside doors, and then we're just going to go on with our regular lives, right? So last term we had, there was some sort of police incident over at the McDonald's. We heard at some point that somebody might have a gun. As it turned out, they did not have a gun. They were just causing a disturbance or whatever. But in a situation like that, yeah, we would want to lock our doors here and make sure that nobody can really get in. But there was no danger to the school, and with the hold and secure, there is no danger to the school. So we just lock all the outside doors, and then we all just kind of continue with our day, right? So that's going to happen at 1:45. I think it should be easy because we don't really have to do anything. We just keep going with class, okay? So let's see. So Nancy is here. Good morning, Nancy. Kayla is here. Good morning, Kayla. And Vito is here. Good morning to you. Let's get rolling here. So on Friday we started talking about Egypt, right? And Egypt is one of these other kind of first civilizations on the planet. So we looked at Mesopotamia, we looked at the Sumerians, and Egypt develops a little bit later, so they're a little bit behind Mesopotamia. But as we mentioned, they kind of develop in their own way, right? They're separated from Mesopotamia by the hundreds of miles of desert, as they're separated from most other civilizations. And so Egypt is allowed to kind of evolve on its own without too much influence from the outside, at least in the beginning of its period, or beginning of its history. Later on, it will be very connected to the Greeks. It'll get conquered by Alexander the Great. The Romans will conquer it later, and it'll be very much worked into the power of the Mediterranean. But now it's just kind of evolving on its own, and it doesn't really have to deal with too many outside forces. Now, when we broke on Friday, I was just about to get you to read this, so I think I'm going to start with that because it kind of sets the stage for some of the things that happen in ancient Egypt, right? So it gives us a bit of how civilization starts to appear. It'll talk a little bit about what pharaohs are and what their job is. It'll talk about this guy Narmer, who is kind kind of interesting. It'll talk about Egyptian writing, and it'll talk about some of the sort of technological innovations that the Egyptians made. And like the Mesopotamians, the Egyptians were quite adept in science and math, but we'll see that as we go forward, okay? So let me give you some time. I see there that I've got pages 42 to something. I'm just actually going to look and see what it's supposed to be. And then I will turn you loose to do a little reading, answer some questions, and then we can talk about these things, okay? But let me just see where I'd like you to read. And actually, what I'll do here. So, yeah, it's page 42. You're starting at 2.13, Ancient Egypt. And you're going to read 42 to 45. Yeah, 42 to 45, okay? So questions are right here. I'll give you some time, then we can talk, okay? Time on the clock here. Yes, correct. Yeah, so in the world history text on Microsoft Teams. Oh, can I can. Would that be easier for you?
Yeah, if like we have it before the class, we can review like what courses we are going to study, and then when we are like attend the class, we know like what we are going to speak about.
Okay, I can try and do that.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Yep, I can do that. The only thing I'll caution you about there is that sometimes it it may change, because the reason I don't put it up ahead of time now is, number one, because I don't think anyone looks at them beforehand. But secondly, sometimes I have more slides originally, like I have more, and then if we don't get to it, then I chop off the stuff we don't get to, and I post what we've done already. So if I post it ahead of time, which I can, the only thing I just keep in mind that there might be more than we actually get to.
I
Okay.
think that like a day before a class like this.
A day, well, that's the thing, is that because I'll do my best, but again, like what we do tomorrow, for instance, depends on how far we get today, and so sometimes I have to figure that out. But I can post it a little bit ahead of time, but it depends, right? Depends how far we get on a given day. So I'll try to get it in there earlier, but it'll depend on the day before
Thank you.
a little bit. Okie dokie, good people. Do you want to chat about some of this?
Sure.
Yeah. I think this is very interesting here. What was happening here in Egypt around 36 to 3100 BCE, and how many how many years ago is that roughly? How much? Yeah, about 5, because we add about 2,000 years, right? So we're looking at about 5,600 years ago to about 5,300 years ago. What's going on in Egypt?
A complex society is formed in areas adjacent to the Nile River.
Okay.
Like these communities exert an increased influence over their environments, exhibited a social differentiation, and showed evidence of labor
Right.
specialization.
Right. So we have a complex civilization forming here in the Nile Valley around 3600 BCE. What was kind of pushing this complex society to form? What kind of changes were occurring?
Humans took patriarchal demand cleared the land and could support population densities of up to 1,000 people per square.
Okay, so definitely they were increasing their ability to produce food, right? So they were able to quadruple the amount of land that they farmed earlier, so that's good. But what's forcing people to build this new civilization?
Increase of
Population, yeah.
population.
Yeah, probably. But the text mentions something else. There's something else that's kind of pushing them a little bit. Something else is pushing them. It's kind of happening a little bit earlier, though. Or it's part of a longer trend. What's pushing these people to build this complex? No, but it is true that they recognized how important the Nile was to their livelihood. They certainly recognized that. What's kind of pushing people to?
Because the wind blows from north to south,
Uh-huh.
and then like in the opposite direction of the river flow, like thus facilitating the trade and contact between Upper Egypt to the south and Lower Egypt to the north.
Well, not so much. But let me help you with this, okay? Unless anyone wants to take a last kind of crack at it. Want to take one more crack at it? What's kind of encouraging them to start to build this complex civilization? I'll give you a hint. It had to do with Arnold Toynbee's stimulus and response question from Mesopotamia. Or is that like the worst hint ever? Remember the Toynbee's stimulus and response? It was a question from the Mesopotamia video or the Sumerian video. Okay, let me explain. So Toynbee's idea from that video was that people started to build complex civilizations. They started to cooperate with each other in more sophisticated ways when the environment kind of forced them to, right? He said that if the environment was very plentiful and there was food everywhere, people didn't really find the need to cooperate in a very complex way, right? It was just easy to get food. If the environment was too harsh, then people just couldn't live there at all and they just had to move. But there was this kind of spot in the middle where, food isn't super plentiful, so you have to kind of cooperate. And that's kind of what's happening here in Egypt because the climate is changing, is it not? Yeah, so if you go back before this period into the 5 and 7,000 BCE, you see that Egypt is a slightly wetter place, right? They get rain more often, they can grow food, they can have goats and sheep and things like that and have them graze in other areas. But as we move closer to this period of history, Egypt is kind of warming up a little more and it's drying out, right? And so all those people who lived in other places are getting pushed towards the river, right? Because all their land is drying out. And so once they're kind of stuck living next to the river, and like Felicia mentioned, their populations are increasing, they have to start to cooperate in more sophisticated ways. They have to start to farm in more sophisticated ways. And so they do, right? So their population probably has something to do with it, but also the changing climate does as well, right? It forces people next to the river because the land that they used to farm and graze their goats on and things has all dried up. And so now everybody is next to the river, and as populations increase, they have to start cooperating in more sophisticated ways, right? Just like we saw in Mesopotamia, and just like we saw in that little sort of chart or graphic I showed you. The same kind of process occurs in Egypt. So what do we learn about pharaohs in this section?
Pharaohs ruled as the kings, as the personifications of the gods. Like they promised order in the universe when things went well. The pharaohs were credited with agricultural productivity and the success of the state. There was no separation between religion and the state in ancient Egypt.
Okie dokie. So, a few interesting things there, right? They are, what was the first thing you said, Felicia?
Ruled as divine kings, as the personification of the gods.
Right. And where do these pharaohs kind of come from? Right? How do we get people who are, who rule as gods?
In the Bible, they come from very last dates, but from some of them, they thought that they are like God. They are in the sky and they always show see us and something like that. And one of their gods is for like when they are married. One of their gods that someday give them goods and something like that.
Yeah, so and that's kind of how gods operate, right? They're kind of in the sky and they're kind of watching over us. But Egypt is really interesting because one of those is actually in charge here on earth, right? The pharaoh is seen as an actual god, right? Not the chosen one of the gods, right? Not a priest who worships the gods, but an actual god in himself, right?
Talking about Egyptians,
Yeah.
they had
Well, one of their gods. We'll get to it in a minute, but the Egyptians are polytheistic, just like the Mesopotamians were, right? So multiple gods, but the Pharaoh himself, yeah, is looked at as a god on earth, right? That's why they say here in the text that there's no separation between the state and religion, right? There's not government and religion. They're both the same thing, right? Imagine if we thought Justin Trudeau was a god. Like literally a god, not, a guy with cool hair, but like actually a god, right? That would mean that everything that happens in Canada had to do with religion, right? Paying your taxes would be a religious thing, right? Because your taxes are going to a god, right? So for Egypt here, because they have a god as their head of state, there's no separation between the sort of secular, right, the non-religious and the religious. Everything is religious, right? Everything has a religious element to it. But remember here what we said about people who, when civilizations were developing, you needed somebody to kind of organize the canals, right? To plan them and engineer them and dig them. And then eventually you needed someone to kind of oversee their operation. But here, and we said that eventually those people kind of move into an administration and then sort of a leader of some sort. But here, they actually evolve into more than a leader. They evolve into a god, right? It's not just somebody who is in charge of the canals, but somebody who is in charge of the flooding of the Nile itself, right? And if you can predict it, if you know how high it's going to come every year, and if you know when it's going to come, you can say, yes, I did it because the God revealed it to me. The God of the Nile revealed it to me, and now I can tell you, right? And eventually that turns into, I am the God, right? That's how I know these things. The God didn't tell me, but I, in fact, have become the God, right? So here in Egypt, we see these people kind of rising up based on their ability to kind of control the natural environment, right? To sort of predict when things are going to happen and to sort of maintain the stability of Egypt as well. And we'll see pharaohs kind of become responsible for that as well, doing the correct rituals to make sure that the world and the universe continues to operate as it should. Okay, so we hear about Narmer. Who's this Narmer guy?
A king that is claiming a special relationship.
He does claim a special relationship with the gods. How do we know that he does that? Yeah, it's from this palette of Narmer. Let's have a look at it here. There it is. I'm going to get rid of my counter here. So there's this palette of Narmer. So it's a stone kind of sculpture. I think it's quite big, I think. And you can see up at the top, you see the little cow-headed things with the horns? Yeah, so that's the goddess Hathor, right? And she's looking down on Narmer here and kind of blessing what he's doing and approving of what he's doing, right? And so what's he doing there on the left side of this thing? No, I think in this one he's the one on the left. He's wearing the crown of Upper Egypt. So that's the one that looks. I'll show you another picture in a minute. That's the one that looks like the bowling pin on his head.
The one that he's holding the rival.
Yeah. So he's got some rival king by the hair, right? The guy's on his knees, and what's Narmer gonna do? Yeah, it looks like he's gonna crush his head. I think he's got. It looks like he's got a club of some sort, and I think he's gonna like crush this guy's head. Oof. The ancient world was a brutal place.
Maybe he's cutting his head.
I don't think so. Not in this case. Not in this case. He's gonna, and you can see all of his enemies below him, right? See on the bottom left?
Alright.
Yeah, those are the ones that he's already cut their hair, if you will. So he's got enemies below him that he's defeated, and there he is about to defeat another enemy, right? And the goddess looks on and blesses him, right? So he's this guy, and what does he do that's important?
He's sacrificing to the god.
Not quite. What's he going to do here?
Punishing them.
Well, yeah, but the greater thing that he's doing.
What for both?
Well, historically, what's he doing?
Like
Narmer.
unifier of upper and lower Egypt.
Yes. So he's going to unify Upper and Lower Egypt. And so this is a little confusing, but keep in mind that the Nile River flows from south to north. Okay? So it flows kind of up the map. Lower Egypt is where the river empties out into the sea, right? That's the lower end of the river. The upper end of the river is further up. And so Upper Egypt is in the south, Lower Egypt is in the north. Sounds a little confusing, but keep in mind the ancient Egyptians oriented themselves by the river, right? And so Upper Egypt was higher up the river, Lower Egypt was down in the river delta by the sea, right? So Narmer here is going to unite both of them, right? He's going to unite the lower part and the upper part and turn it into one unit which he will be the king of, right? And for most of Egypt's history, Egypt will remain united like this. So the upper part and the lower part will be ruled by one guy, right, who will claim that he is a god. There's a couple times in history where Egypt will kind of break apart. There'll be pharaohs in Upper and Lower Egypt. Sometimes they'll get invaded. But almost all of its history, it winds up being a unified kind of country, if you will. And Narmer's the first one to do that. Oh yeah, and I'll show you actually one more thing. This is the crown situation they were talking about. And so you'll see this in other Egyptian pieces of art and sculpture and hieroglyphs and things like that. This is kind of the crowns of the pharaohs. So the crown of Upper Egypt is this kind of bowling pin looking hat. Of Lower Egypt, it's this kind of very strange chair-shaped crown with a little frog tongue out of it. I know these are strange descriptions, but... And then you can see here, if you wear the double crown, then you are the king of both, right? You're the king of Upper and Lower Egypt. So you'll see kings wearing some of these crowns in Egyptian artwork, but I just wanted to show you that. Okie dokie. Oh yeah. Egyptian writing. How is it different than the Sumerian cuneiform language that we saw?
I think we use like a different type of writing versus hieroglyphic.
Hieroglyphic?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hieroglyphic and glyphic.
Oh, so there's three, you're telling me. Interesting. So the Egyptians have not one written script for their language, not two written scripts, but in fact 3 written scripts. Sounds complicated. Why on earth would you want 3 different ways of writing your language?
The first one is for ritual texts,
Okay.
and the other 2 scripts we later use for administrative, commercial, and many other purposes.
Right. So we've got these 3 different types of written language, right? So the Egyptians are speaking one language, right? Blah, 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 blah in ancient Egyptian, but they can write that language in 3 ways, right? So the hieroglyphic one is probably the one that you're familiar with, right? You've probably seen something like this. You can see all sorts of shapes. Some of them are feathers, some of them are birds, some of them are plants and other animals. You can see humans in there, some sort of abstract symbols, right? This is the sort of more formal way of writing. So if you were going to carve a tomb, or if you're going to create a tomb, or if you're creating a big ritual temple, you're going to see things written like this, because this is their kind of original, formal, sacred text language, if you will, right? But if you can imagine, if you're trying to take notes in class and your writing system is like this, you're never going to be able to keep up, right? This takes a long time to, it's like one letter, you're trying to draw an owl for, 10 minutes, right? You can't write quickly that way, right? So the ancient Egyptians develop another set. Actually, we'll come to that in a second. Yeah, the other thing that's kind of interesting about hieroglyphic is that it is very complicated to read because the symbols do multiple things, okay? So we said that cuneiform was phonetic, right? So it was kind of like the English or the Phoenician alphabet where each symbol is a sound, right? Here in hieroglyphic, sometimes that's true. Sometimes the symbol is a sound. Sometimes the symbol is a whole thing, right? It's an ideogram, so it actually means what the symbol looks like. And then sometimes you have little characters that tell you what it is. So it tells you if that little symbol is the sound or the whole idea. So we said that, English works on a sound alphabet. Mandarin works on an ideogram alphabet, right, where each symbol is a whole word. Hieroglyphic does both of these things at the same time, right? It switches back and forth. So it's tricky to read, right? It's a complicated way of writing. So again, I'm going to jump ahead here. So the Egyptians then, because that original hieroglyphic takes a long time to write out, temple priests came up with this, hieratic. And so hieratic, you can see, is a lot quicker to write, right? You could imagine if you were trying to take notes, you could probably, if you knew how to write this, you could probably take notes pretty quickly, right? The other one, the hieroglyphic, pretty tough to keep up, right? It's too complicated. And then there's a third one that kind of regular people start to use, which is demotic, and that's demotic right there. Okay, so hieratic, I think, if I remember, tends to be used by temple priests. This is used by kind of people who aren't priests, okay, but need to write things down. Now, somebody asked me the question about translation of these languages, and for ancient Egyptian, this was the key to figuring out their language. So ancient Egyptian was actually forgotten for a long period of time. So if you go through the history of ancient Egypt, you'll see that Egypt is ruled by Egyptians. There's pharaohs for centuries and centuries, for millennia, really, for thousands of years. And then it's going to get conquered in about, spoiler alert, it's going to get conquered in 331 by Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great is Macedonian, so he's kind of like he's Greek. And after that, Egypt will be ruled by the Greeks. And so eventually, the Greek language will kind of take the place of the Egyptian language. It'll kind of push it out. And eventually people forget how to speak ancient Egypt or ancient Egyptian, and nobody speaks it anymore. So up until kind of the late 1800s and early 1900s, nobody spoke ancient Egyptian. Nobody knew how to read it until they unearthed this particular stone in a place called Rosetta, Egypt. And so this here is the Rosetta Stone. You may have heard of the language software or apps you can get called Rosetta Stone. It's named after this thing. And so the Rosetta Stone here, found in 1799, has a decree from the Pharaoh, from Ptolemy V. Ptolemy's a Greek, by the way, but that's not important here. And what you see is a decree from the Pharaoh in 3 different languages, okay? So at the top, you've got hieroglyphic. In the middle, you've got demotic, which is that third version. And at the bottom, in the bottom, you have ancient Greek, okay? And so scholars didn't really know how to read the top two, but they did know how to read ancient Greek. We never really forgot how to do that. And so, very carefully, historians and linguists started to try to match up the pieces and try to figure out how to read the top two portions from the bottom one. Say again? Why is there ancient Greek? Because the Greeks were in charge of Egypt in that period.
They focus from,
Yes.
and the name is from ancient Egypt.
Yes.
And how come there's ancient Greek?
Because the Greeks are in charge of ancient Egypt at this time. Ptolemy is a Greek person, but he's ruling Egypt as a pharaoh. So Greek starts to slowly replace the Egyptian language in this period because the rulers are Greek. But anyway, so they start to work their way back, and it takes a long time. It takes like 25 years, I think, at least. And one of the clues they have are these little cartouches, these little bubbles. And what they guessed, these historians and linguists, what they guessed, and they guessed right, is that the little words inside the bubble is actually the name of a king. So king or pharaoh names are always in these little bubbles, these little cartouches. And so that was kind of the first thing that they guessed. They're like, this is probably what's happening. And so they were able to kind of work their way back that way. And it took a long time, right? And I don't know how you do this. This is painstaking work, just poring over the same text until you can figure out and guess what things mean what. But they did it, right? And so because of the Rosetta Stone, we can actually read ancient Egyptian writing, which is incredible, right? Last question I think was, other innovations that the Sumerians made. What are some of these, or the Sumerians, the Egyptians, what are some of these other innovations? What did they have? What did they do? Give me one. Innovations of ancient Egypt.
Invented the ramp and lever.
The ramp and the lever? Good. Somebody else, give me something else.
12-month calendar.
Okay, a calendar with 12 months and 365 days. Sounds familiar. Take a break, Felicia. You're working too hard. You're making me sweat over here. What else? Medical procedures, right? The ancient Egyptians had knowledge of medicine, right? They could set bones and treat people with medicines, right? Great. What else? Did you mention anything else after that?
Modern plowing.
Modern what?
Modern
Plowing?
plowing.
Yeah, well, they certainly have a lot of agricultural advancements that they make, right? And plowing fields is one of those things, right? Not to mention the canals and irrigation and stuff like that. What else? Did they mention anything else? Innovations of the ancient Egyptians?
They use straw to build the constructions.
Oh.
Construction.
Maybe a little bit. Maybe a little bit. Yeah, they used the reeds that grow by the Nile are papyrus, and they used those to make paper. So while the Sumerians were writing on clay, the Egyptians were writing sometimes on paper, on papyrus paper. What else? Let me just see. Anything else? Oh, right, in geometry? Yeah. So the Egyptians know their math and their geometry and their engineering, as it turns out, right? So some of those pyramids that you see, and every time you hear about ancient Egypt, you see the picture of the pyramids. Those are incredible works of engineering, right? You can't build those things if you don't understand the engineering, right? If you don't understand the math, the geometry, how to load the blocks properly, You need to know how to do all that stuff, right? And the Egyptians figure it out, right? Um, they know how to get these things perfect. And again, if you look at some of the pyramids, especially those big three that you see in every postcard, they are perfectly square, like almost to the inch. They are perfect squares. They are perfectly aligned north south, and you can't fake that, right? You need to know the math to get that right, and they know the math, right? They know the engineering, and they can do this stuff, right? Oh yeah, and glass making. These guys knew how to blow glass. Incredible, right? Incredible technology. Um, okay, so let's take a break, come back, and when we come back, I will introduce you to two ancient Egyptians and we'll see what we can kind of learn about them. Okay? Two particular ancient Egyptians. All right. Take a break, folks. We'll see you shortly. Okay, and we are back. So we've learned a little bit about the sort of kickoff of ancient Egypt, right? And again, there's people living in this part of the world thousands and thousands of years ago, 8 or 10,000 years. They're starting to grow their own food. They're herding animals, probably like sheep and goats and things like that. But we also find out that the climate is changing, right? And so this part of the world is kind of drying out, and it's forcing those people that lived away from the river to kind of move closer to the river, right? That's increasing the population around the river, and they have to start farming differently, right? They have to switch to intensive agriculture. And that starts to create a complex civilization, right? With some people that have power, right? And in this case, it's very interesting because that person becomes so powerful that they actually become a god, right? They're literally a god on earth. I don't even think that that's. I'm trying to think of other leaders that have, like ancient world leaders that have proclaimed themselves as gods. Like I know in Rome they used to worship the emperors as a god, but I think at the same time you knew that the emperor wasn't a god. But in Egypt they like legitimately believed that the pharaoh was an actual god. I don't know. It's probably not the only historical example of this, but it's not super common. What? Yes.
So like, I know like they translate ancient Greek, ancient Egypt from ancient Greek.
Yeah.
But then how can they read ancient Egypt?
How can they read it? How do you mean? How did they figure it out?
I mean, like you know the meaning of the words.
Yeah.
But how do you read it?
How do you read it?
Yeah.
Oh, that I don't know. That I don't know. Although, well, hang on. Hang on. If you are interested, are you legitimately interested, or are you just you're just curious? You're not messing with me? Okay. So here, let's look at this. I'm not sure how accurate some of these are, but here's an example. So here we can see what some of the hieroglyphs mean, but these are ideograms, right? Because these don't so some of the shapes represent sounds, but some of them represent actual ideas, right? So there's an H sound apparently, but it also means rope, right? So you would have to, if you were reading, you'd have to figure out whether you should interpret that symbol as a sound or whether you should interpret it as an entire word, right? Because hieroglyphs can go back and forth. But again, I'm not sure how accurate some of these are. This looks a little suspect to me. Because these are all English letters, but as you probably know, as speakers of multiple languages, not all languages have exactly the same sounds, right? Yeah. So I'm not sure that ancient Egyptian had all the sounds that we have in English, and I'm sure that they had sounds that we don't use in English. So this makes me a little unsure. I don't feel that that's correct. But yeah, but they figured it out, right? It's another one that looks similar. Let's see. I think the long and short of this is that, and again, I'd have to do the research, it's not an easy language to read, I don't think. You know, like ancient Greek, I think, is easier to read, especially if you're used to reading English. But it can be done, just not by me. that's not really an answer to your question, is it, Felicia? Or is it, or isn't it? Not really. Wh- did I misunderstand your question, or do I just not have an answer for it?
No, yeah, that's what they do because I think English versus Mandarin sounds different.
Yeah.
Like how do they finally figure out how to read ancient?
Yeah, well, I think that's a question I don't have an answer to. Like I know they were able to start out with those little cartouches and guess that, okay, that's a king's name, so we know that's a king's name there, and we can figure it out. But after that, I don't know. Like I think it's very difficult, and it involves, you have to understand how languages work, and you have to understand, and you have to like make guesses, right, and try to. It's what? Yeah. Well, that's always a challenge too, right? Is that you have to not only translate but ensure that you are expressing the correct kind of meaning, right? The feeling of what's being said. And sometimes that happens even when we're translating modern languages, right? Something you can say in one language just doesn't, it's not the same in another one, right? You can translate it perfectly, but it's like no, it doesn't feel right, right? Or it doesn't communicate the same thing. So yeah, I mean this isn't an easy thing to do, right? And you have to, you really have to understand how languages work, which, helps, right? Like languages do operate in a fairly predictable way for the most part. And so if you really understand how human language works, yeah, you can make some good guesses, right? You can make guesses about how they communicate meaning. But again, it's not an easy process, and I'm not even going to pretend that I understand how to do this, right? It's a very specialized skill, but people have managed to do it, and we do have a lot of writing from ancient Egypt. Now, we're going to run out of time, but we're going to start anyway. I said that I was going to introduce you to two ancient Egyptians, and I'm going to do it with this video documentary that I found. So, what this is about is talking about the lives of ancient Egyptians, and kind of how they lived, what they ate, just kind of what their regular life was like, right? Because we could talk about the pharaohs, but there's really only one pharaoh, right? And everybody else in Egypt is living a completely different life than the pharaoh is. And so, let's look at Egyptian culture, and let's look at what regular people are doing and how they're living and what they think about and all these things, okay? So this documentary is going to focus mostly on two ancient Egyptians that actually existed, a man named Ka and his wife, who was named Merit. Okay, and so Ka and Merit are husband and wife, and you'll learn some things about them. I have some questions here just for you to keep track of what things you should pay attention to and what things I may ask on a quiz. Hint, hint, hint. The questions are in Microsoft Teams, as they usually are, as is the link for the video, okay? So online people, just to kind of save time, what I'll do is I'll turn you loose here, and what we'll do is we'll watch, how much time do we have left in class here? 23 minutes? We'll watch about 20 minutes of it, okay? And then we'll pick it up tomorrow and we'll answer these questions, okay? So online people, I'll let you go and watch the documentary. The link is in Microsoft Teams, as are the questions. Watch 20 minutes of it, answer what you can, and then we'll start on that tomorrow, okay? So online people, we'll see you tomorrow. Good luck. Have a nice afternoon. Sorry I'm rushing here, but I feel like I have to. Okay, bye.